Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, members of this committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present a very strong set of provisions in this measure offered by your Committee on Natural Resources. Let me start by clearly stating the connection between the overall goals of this measure and the provisions within the jurisdiction of natural resources. First, international trade and commerce includes a plethora of natural resources, and that trade and commerce should forward our overall goals, and it should be international rules based. Number two, supply chains are just as critical in natural resources trade as any other good and service. Number three, the U.S. has led the world in environmental, labor, and human rights standards, and we cannot allow countries who violate those standards in the extraction, exploitation, and export of natural resources to benefit economically to the derogation of our standards. Number four, we need to lead in the protection and perpetuation of our natural resources and, through our own commercial and trade practices, incentivize similar protections on those who do not prioritize our international resources. And five, natural resources know really no man-made boundaries. The oceans, the air, the flora and fauna, it's all one big world and interconnected. In this context, and with respect to this measure and China specifically, the State Department reports that China is one of the worst offenders of any country in the world in key natural resources protections: greenhouse gases, marine debris, illegal, unregulated, and unreported, or IUU fishing, wildlife trafficking, and of course, human rights and slave labor. In response, the Natural Resources Division of this bill contains important provisions, many of which are bipartisan, bicameral, that will improve U.S. competitiveness globally and with China, will help us hold bad actors accountable, will secure America's long-term economic security, and will contribute to international protections of our precious world resources. The Natural Resources Committee division includes legislation to protect our oceans, combat wildlife trafficking, and ensure that seafood imported into this country does not come from illegal or slave harvested fishing practices. Title I addresses illegal fishing, slavery, and other human rights abuses in the seafood supply chain. China is a significant producer of unlawful fish products and, of course, a major concern for human rights abuses. The U.S. is the largest seafood importer globally, and 11% of imported seafood in the U.S. in 2019 was the product of IUU fishing. This title will strengthen laws to address IUU fishing and slave labor. This will allow U.S. fishers with fair labor practices and sustainably caught seafood products to obtain a fair price for their products instead of being undercut by fish projects from China who do not comply with international standards. The Natural Resources Division also includes a phase out of drift gillnet fishing gear and a transition program to more sustainable equipment on the West Coast in Title II, and in Title VIII, provisions to promote U.S. caught fish products and encourage U.S. government agencies to purchase seafood caught in the USA. Finally, Title XIII addresses the shark fin trade, eliminating domestic sales. China is one of the largest markets for shark fins, rendering sharks some of the most endangered fish in the ocean and severely risking our international marine ecosystem. Titles 4 through 6 of the Natural Resources Division include the bipartisan, bicameral Restoring Resilient Reefs Act, led by Representative Soto in the House and Senator Rubio in the Senate. Coral reefs are some of the most threatened ecosystems in the world because of climate change and warming, disease, habitat destruction, and the coral trade. In the U.S., coral reefs help protect some of our most strategic assets in the U.S. territories, Florida, and Hawaii. We should be leading the world in coral conservation and restoration. Instead, other countries like the United Arab Emirates have actually donated millions to us to restore our corals. These titles reauthorize the Coral Reef Conservation Program and address the needs of state and territories to conserve and protect their vulnerable coral reef ecosystems. The Natural Resources Division also contains provisions to address wildlife trafficking and disease threats from wildlife. Scientists believe that the coronavirus that caused the COVID-19 pandemic originated from the wildlife trade in China. One provision will expand the fledgling Fish and Wildlife Service law enforcement attaché program to build up a U.S. presence in wildlife trafficking hotspots worldwide. Another provision, again based off of a Senator Rubio bill, addresses loopholes in the wildlife trade that could spread disease by amending the Lacey Act to allow for emergency bans on wildlife imports that threaten human health. The Natural Resources Division also addresses emerging geopolitical issues in the Arctic and the deep sea. China, Russia, and other countries are introducing icebreakers and new shipping lanes in the Arctic, threatening the fragile ecosystem in Arctic marine mammals. Title III directs further analysis and cooperation to address marine mammal stranding and rehabilitation in the Arctic specifically. Deep sea mining for rare earth elements is the next frontier, and China plans to exploit the deep sea for minerals. Given China's ever expanding claims to the high seas, the U.S. must take proactive steps to address and understand the uncertainties and environmental impacts. Title X directs studies on deep sea mining and carbon storage in the deep sea environment. Several amendments on both sides of the aisle will further strengthen U.S. leadership and competitiveness, boost ocean science and conservation, address wildlife imports, and build domestic energy sources. These provisions collectively from your Natural Resources Committee, I believe, constitute a solid, firm, and widespread foundation for the direct and correct treatment of natural resources in this bill. And we thank you very much for your consideration. I yield back.